Alright, so we're going to talk about free and open and what that means. Basically, this is based on the idea of free culture. If you know what free software is or open source software, that's kind of where this all comes from. We're going to talk about it. There's going to be a history lesson, I'm sorry, but you kind of have to understand history to understand why it works. So, who's this cat? That's me. I love cupcakes. I'm a special education teacher. I teach math, 6 through 8. All of these people know me. They teach with me. I'm a podcaster. I'm on several podcasts, actually. My baby is the Open Ed Tech podcast. I do that. We talk about open source and free software tools for education. That's a lot of what this is going to be about. I'm a free culture advocate for my life a lot of the time if it's outside of education. And like I said, I love cupcakes. My daughter calls that cupcake face because it's awesome.
You've had better faces.
I don't think I have, because I'm really happy in that picture. All right, so what is free and open source? They're not the same thing. There's a difference between free and there's a difference between open source. Free starts with this guy right here, Richard Stallman. He has the most awesome beard ever. He goes by RMS. He's in sort of the hacker community, and so a lot of these old timers, as I call them, they all have like these 3-letter acronyms because a lot of them worked in universities and that's what their logins were. So they kind of all had that going for them. The next thing is, what is free and open source? There's a difference between free and free. English has this real pesky problem that we have too many frees. One, free, is with a capital F. That means free as in freedom. When we talk about free software, that's what we're talking about. It has nothing to do with cost. Although, most free software is also free as in pizza or beer. The term that you'll hear is free as in freedom, not as in beer. I don't drink, so I thought, what else is awesome when it's free? Pizza. So I use that, and it's more kid-friendly. So the story behind free software is Richard Stallman was working at MIT in the Artificial Intelligence Laboratory, and they had a printer. And this was, before this point, all software was pretty much open source. You could get the code, you could look at it and change it. That was just the nature of programming at that time. So they got this printer, and it was on a couple floors up, I think. And every time they wanted to do a print job, they had written the script that would send a message down so you wouldn't have to go upstairs and do stuff. Well, the university bought this new printer, and they didn't have that, so he wanted to add that into the programming, so he contacted the company, and he's like, hey, let me get the source, and I'll add that in. And they're like, no, it's proprietary. You can't see the code. He's like, no, really, I want to give you something for free to make it better for everybody. Like, let me see the code. And that irritated him enough that he came up with the idea of free software. So there are 4 freedoms in free software. The first one is freedom 0. Programmers start with 0. They don't start with 1. It's a math thing. So freedom 0 is the freedom to run the program as you wish for any purpose. So if I write a program and it's free software and I write it to count cupcakes, if you want to use it to count cows, have at it. You can put it on any device you want, do anything you want with it. Freedom 1 is the freedom to study how the program works and change it so it does your computing as you wish. This is basically being able to see source. So when I write a computer program, it's a bunch of math, basically. Anybody can see that math. Anybody can change it, which is one of the big power of it. It is the power of having that ability. Freedom 2 is the freedom to distribute copies as you can help your neighbor. So if I have a copy of it and Mary wants a copy of it, I just give it to her. That's fine. And then the third one is I can distribute copies that are modified. So if I take it, I fix it for me, and then I give it to Mary. That's perfectly okay. As long as you have these 4 things, you have free software, okay? And it starts in software, but it has branched out. And free culture is basically having these 4 freedoms for anything you create, okay? And what we're gonna talk about is why that's important in education. I know you may have seen this symbol. This is copyleft. It's a hack on copyright. It was basically kind of invented by the free software people. It uses copyright to ensure that anything that I make that is open has to stay open. So if I take an open program and I modify it and I give it to Mary, Mary cannot take that and go over here and close source it and charge money for it. She can charge money for it, but she has to let everybody see the source just like I did. So it's just a way to protect things. We'll talk about Creative Commons in a little bit. Creative Commons has a similar concept called share alike. If I give you something under these licensing terms, you have to use those same terms if you give it to somebody else. And there's a big thing about what copyright is. Open source. Open source is a little different. If you listen to Richard Stallman talk, and he gives a lot of talks, everything is about freedom. And his argument is that the open source people don't talk about the ethics of it. They just talk about the practicality of it. So Eric S. Raymond is one of the people who helped develop the idea of open source. It's taking those 4 freedoms, you may get 3 of them. You may not get all of them. And so the business community likes that a lot better because in some cases, like I was saying with Mary, I could write something, she could take it, she could close source it and make money off of it. So the business community really likes that. Depending on your definition of free, it could be one or the other. Some people argue that open source is a little more free as in freedom because you can do what you want with it. It gives you the freedom to do that. Oh, thank you. Eric Raymond wrote this book, The Cathedral and the Bazaar, which is awesome. It basically kind of outlines the idea of open source, and he was on the ground floor of Linux. And this book was really influential. If you know Mozilla, they make Firefox. They used to make a web browser called Netscape. And so when this book came out, Mozilla was so convinced by this model that they open sourced Netscape. And they were wildly successful with it. And it was the first big win for open source. So Creative Commons is kind of what teachers are probably the most familiar with. Creative Commons is a continuum of basically copyright hacks. So you can take anything you create, as soon as you create an object, doesn't matter what it is, you are assigned a copyright. It's just, in the United States, you're assigned a copyright as soon as you create something. If I write something on a piece of paper, I have copyright on that, which means I have all rights to it. Creative Commons is a way to let you give people rights outside of that. So I can create it and say, if you want to use it, you can use it. That's fine, and I'm not going to do anything to you for using it. Creative Commons is super important in education. A lot of the resources that you'll find out there are being licensed as Creative Commons now because it is more open. You're allowed to use it freely. You're allowed to modify it depending on the license. Okay? So what we're going to do is there is a video attached to this which kind of explains it way better than I'm going to be able to explain it. Now let's try it. There it is. I promise, the history part's about to be over, and we'll talk about
That's right, this is very interesting. I didn't know any of this. This is very interesting.
If you guys hear that.
You share your creativity. You can go anywhere to use it, learn from it, and be inspired by it. Take the teacher who shapes young minds with work and wisdom from around the globe, and the artist who builds beauty out of bits and pieces she finds online. And the writer whose stories, his ideas, and images crafted by people you've never even met. These people know that when you share your creative wealth, you can accomplish great things. They and millions of other people all around the planet are working together to build a richer, better, more vibrant culture using Creative Commons. To understand Creative Commons, you need to know a little bit about how copyright works. Did you know that when you create something, anything, a photograph, a song, a drawing, a film, a story, you automatically own an all rights reserved copyright to that creativity? It's true. Copyright protects your creativity against uses you don't consent to. But sometimes full copyright is too restrictive. What about when you want all those millions and millions of people out there to use your work without the hassle of coming to you for permission? What if you want your work to be freely shared, reused, and built upon by the rest of the world? Luckily, there's an answer. Creative Commons. We provide free copyright licenses you can use to tell people exactly which parts of your copyright you're happy to give to the public. It's easy. It only takes a minute, and it's totally free. Just come to our website and answer a few quick questions like, will you allow commercial use of it? And will you allow your work to be modified? Based on your answers, we'll give you a license that clearly communicates what people can and can't do with your creativity. You don't give up your copyright, you refine it so it works better for you. Welcome to a new world where collaboration rules. It didn't even exist
eliminates plagiarism.
The beginning of the next project.
Right. And so,
A lot of places had the little statements on there, feel free to use this
Right,
in your
yes.
classroom as you need. But all this does is standardize it so you see the emblem and you know you're able to do that
Right.
rather than
I,
finding that statement.
when I explain this to people, I always talk about it in terms of this lubricates sharing. It basically makes it completely frictionless to where if I want to use something, and I'll be honest, I don't use any resources that aren't Creative Commons at this point. Because I want to make sure anything that I build, somebody else can use. So I only base it off of things that I know I'm allowed to use. And so that way, it's a safety net, although education, we've got fair use. We can pretty much kind of do whatever we want with copyright because we're educators. I don't think that sends the right message. I think we should teach, like we were talking about in the opening session today, collaboration, creativity, all these things come when you allow these things to happen. So for me, that's why this is really important. There's a bunch of people who were behind this. Probably the most notable was Larry Lessig. He's a constitutional law professor at Harvard. He was one of the people that worked on this. Aaron Schwartz, who you may or may not know, he was pretty famous a couple years ago. He committed suicide. He was, I believe, 14, and he was one of the people on the team that made Creative Commons. There's a really cool documentary about him called The Internet's Own Boy that is Creative Commons that you can go and watch. And it kind of shows you, he did a lot of things. He was one of the founders of Reddit. I mean, he did a ton of stuff. But there's a whole section about Creative Commons, and so that's a good resource to look at. Whenever I talk to people about using free and open source things, this is usually the first thing they say. Change is scary. I don't like new things. I know my things work. I don't want to try new things. Okay, that's true. Change is scary. But the thing is, you're probably already using it. You don't even know it. How many people have a smartphone? You're using open source software automatically. So Android is based on the Linux kernel, which is GPL. That is free software. That is not to say Android itself is free software. There is a version of Android that's open source. It's called the AOSP. It's the Android open source project. But most Android that you have on your phone is proprietary, but it is based on the Linux kernel. iOS, which everybody, if anybody knows anything about free and open source, Apple is the complete total enemy of free and open source. iOS is built on top of the BSD kernel, which is open source. Mac OS 10 is built on top of the BSD kernel. It is, at its root, open source. Now, they've closed sourced on top of that, which, because BSD is open source and it's not copyleft, they're allowed to do that. They could take that open source code, make it proprietary, and sell it. You can sell free software too. I always tell people, in 2007, I made the decision that I would no longer spend money on proprietary software. If something's not free or open source, I don't buy it, period. Now, like I said at the beginning, free software, typically free. It means I'm not gonna spend a lot of money. That's not true. I actually spend more money on software now than I did when I bought proprietary things. Because a lot of the times when you're using something open source, I need it to do something it doesn't do. I contact the developer. I'm like, hey, can we make it do this? And they're like, hey, let me look at it. Some amount of time happens, and they're like, hey, I put a patch out, check it. I pull it down, it works. I throw that person 20 bones because they did something for me, right? And so I wind up spending a lot of money on this, regardless of the fact that it's actually cash free. The internet. So 36.72%, that's from Wikipedia, of web servers use Linux, which is kind of the free operating system. Another 30.18% use a Unix-based operating system, most of which are open source. There are a few that aren't. So you're looking at over half the internet, probably, depending on the open source distribution of that back half, is open source, at least, if not free. Firefox, we talked about that one already. It's open source, the whole thing. It's the Mozilla public license. It's an open source license. Chrome, we use this every day in Greater Clark. It is not open source, but it is based on Chromium, which is. I use Chromium. You saw earlier I had it up. I could put Chromium on your device and you would not know it's not Chrome. There's only like two or three things in it that aren't in Chromium. like the DRM for Netflix or something, which I don't care about. Not something I'm gonna. Once again, Apple, we're talking about how they're usually not very open source or free friendly. Safari, totally not open source or free, like not at all, not even close. But its core is built on WebKit, which is free software. If there was no WebKit, there would be no Safari. It's the majority of the code of Safari is WebKit. So basically, if you use the internet, you're using free and open source software, unless you're using Internet Explorer, and if you are, get a better web browser. I'm sorry, it's terrible. Don't use it.
Oh, no. Thank you.
But if Chrome goes down, sometimes you don't have any choice.
Since this is being recorded, I'm not going to say what I want to say. So this is the like meat and potatoes of what we're going to talk about. Why does any of this matter, especially as educators? Like, why should I use it? It's free most of the time. Classroom budgets don't exist. They come out of our pockets most of the time. I work in special ed. Special ed technology is very expensive most of the time because companies can jack it up and they know there's government subsidies that will pay for it. There are tons of special ed type things that are free and open source we can use in that place. Security. Lots of eyes sometimes. There's been a couple exceptions to this recently. There was a big thing called Heartbleed that like destroyed the internet, or like everybody was like, this guy is falling. That was an open source project. It did have lots of eyes. There was one dude that was paying attention to it. And basically only one guy could do it. But most of the time, if you're using a piece of open source software, there are lots of developers looking at it all the time because they can all look at the code. So you kind of get this built-in security of saying, oh, there's a bug, let me fix it, because it allows people to do it. The other thing, this is probably the most important to me, is self-hosting. We use a lot of services that we get for free on the internet. Most of them are closed source. You are paying for that with your information. That company knows everything about where you came from, what you're doing on their site, what kind of computer you're at, where you live, all that stuff they're getting, and they're going to sell it or do something with it probably. Self-hosting, you can get a server and put it on a server, and the only person that knows what happens on the server is you. So for special ed, I think we have like totally awesome confidentiality rules that people can't know anything about students. Right? We use Google Docs. I was a little terrified of Google Docs. They have since had a security thing that has made me feel a lot better about it. I would much rather put all our stuff on servers that we own and we control. And that way it never goes outside of the district and nobody sees it besides the people who need to see it. I'm still not comfortable with Google having access to it because those aren't their kids. They don't have their IPs. That's kind of a problem in my eyes. Why should I use adaptability? So this is kind of like what I was talking about. I use on my phone, I have a podcatcher, which is a podcast client. You pulls down podcasts and you listen to them. Called AntennaPod. It's free software. There were a couple things I'm ridiculous. I listened to like 80 podcasts. So I speed them up. I listen to them about 3 times normal speed, which is freaky for most people. My wife gets crazy in the car when she listens to it. But I contacted the developer and I was like, hey, can you change it? And he did it, and he added it for me, and it was awesome. We could do this with any kind of software we use, or lesson plans. If they're Creative Commons, we can change it to be what we need it to be. Khan Academy, all of that stuff is Creative Commons licensed. So I can go in there, it may be a 20-minute video on doing quadratic equations. Well, maybe my kids can't do 20 minutes worth of quadratic equations. I can cut it up into 5-minute chunks and insert pieces of me doing things to explain it and clarifying it in a different way, and that's completely okay because of the way it's licensed.
And that doesn't affect the original. The original is still as it is, you're just creating an additional.
As long as it's licensed that way. Creative Commons is a little tricky because there are different types of licenses. You kind of have to learn how to navigate that. They have an awesome tool on their website to where you go and it says get a license, you click it, and they, like it said in the video, they ask you a couple questions. And then you can see what kind of license that means. And to learn it, what I did is I just kind of went through and clicked randomly and saw what each one would give me until I understood the different suffixes. So like I can do share alike, which means if I give it to you and you give it to somebody else, that's completely cool, but you have to respect my original. So if mine is share alike, you have to make your share alike. You can have non-commercial. I can make something and say, you can use it, but under no circumstances can you ever make money off of it. And things like that. I can say no derivatives, which means you can use it, but you can't change it. So there are all these different, it basically is just more fine-tuned control over how you copyright things. That's all Creative Commons is. But that lets you adapt things really, really, really easily, especially if you're knowledgeable about how to do that stuff. If you're not, somebody in your building is. Like there's always that tech guy, right? I know he is for Jeff, I know I am for Charlestown Middle School. So there's somebody in your building that can help you do those things.
In your spare time.
In the spare time that I don't have. Okay, so learning opportunities. Creativity, we were talking about this morning. So I like to make models. I don't know how many people know that about me. You guys probably do that.
I've heard of it.
Right, so I like to build models. I've done it since I was a wee little lad. I love building models. The thing that's awesome about models is I buy a box and it has a picture on it, and by the end of it, I will have that thing. And it's a learning opportunity that I get to put together this thing. I also love Legos. Legos are just a box of shapes, and I just go from zero. I make something from nothing. Okay? We were talking about this morning too, creation versus consumption. If you look at Bloom's taxonomy, which is right there, creation is at the top. For some reason, this pyramid's up. Well, usually you see it the other way, but that's the top. Creation is one of the highest things on Bloom's taxonomy. This is depth of knowledge. Like this is exactly the kind of thing that we're getting railed on that we need to fix. This is an opportunity to do it. If we give kids the tools to build things and learn from them and put together their own things from resources, they're able to do that. This is a story I tell all the time. My daughter Willow was awesome. She's 8 years old today. Today's her birthday, I know. I built a 3D printer. I love 3D printing. I built an open source 3D printer. I printed all the parts on a 3D printer, which I live in the future. And so my daughter witnessed this whole process of me building something from nothing, which she had seen it before, but nothing like this technical. One of her hobbies is she likes to put together jewelry. She takes beads and she strings them together, and kind of a girly thing, but she's into it. So as she watched me build this printer, she was still doing her thing, which was cool. Once it was finished, she saw me printing things, and then like the gears started spinning in her head. Her language changed. Instead of saying, anybody who's had an 8-year-old kind of knows this, can we buy this, can I have this? This kind of consumerism gene that we all have. She started changing to, can I make this? Can we make this? It became creative, it became collaborative. And all it was a piece of technology. She could have done it with clay or whatever, but this was a piece of technology that was frictionless for her. We could build something and she could create something from the ground up. She has since learned how to use Tinkercad, which is an online 3D modeling program. Now she's designing the beads and printing them that she makes her jewelry out of. So she went from up here to down here at source level. She's building the source pieces. And she's 8 years old. So that's a huge amount of depth of knowledge. Like it's crazy to think that that's possible now. And that's what all this technology has made possible. This is one of my favorite examples of open source being used. Penn Manor High School is in Pennsylvania. They, I guess it was 2 years ago, they went 1-to-1 at their high school, just like we did. They gave every single kid a Linux laptop, and every single kid was a root user, which means they had complete control over what they install, what they use, everything. And it's gone fantastic. And so there's a video here that Red Hat's a huge open source company. They created Red Hat Linux, which if there's a big company running Linux, it's probably Red Hat. So I'll show you this. It's kind of long, but it's awesome. We may not watch the whole thing, just depending on it.
Red Hat's been around for a long time.
Yeah, Red Hat was one of the first open source companies. And they're massively successful. They make billions of dollars a year.
How big is this school system?
Well, Linux was
smaller than us. And they did it with their high school, and that was the pilot
Just
program.
like one high school?
One high school, and I believe that's the only high school in their district. It's a smaller district. They have since this year done their middle school too. So they pushed it down, same exact thing, they just pushed it down. Where'd my picture go?
We decided early on that we wanted our kids to be engineers and inventors and not technology tourists. And here's where we broke from tradition. During our class meetings, we spoke with all of our high school students about the program. We brought them together and we started that conversation with the words, "We trust you." What we didn't want to lose sight of was the fact that any one-to-one program, when you're giving every child a computing device, that is fundamentally an instructional program. It truly shouldn't have anything to do with the technology. Not that the technology isn't important, but it's the learning that is the focus.
We've always been looking at it from the standpoint of we have to educate students for life after high school. And with technology being such an important factor, just about every job that the student's going to go into. It wasn't a matter of should we do it, it was more of when do we provide students with a laptop.
When you give students a chance to explore, you're teaching them to be responsible. And in their future, hopefully in their careers, they will have learned in my class and in their other classes how to be responsible users of technology. It's not going anywhere.
And so why would we ever consider giving a 16-year-old root access to a laptop? I think the question we should be asking is why would we not give students ultimate autonomy and control over their technology devices? I think by unlocking devices and giving kids truly open technology, it empowers them to not only understand what's underneath the hood, but understand that they can impact the world through software, through technology. They can be part of the decisions that are being made and not the result or the end user of someone else's decision. Just for frame of reference, one-to-one help desk models are not unique. This model of having student apprentices is I shouldn't say common, but it's not uncommon, right? The level we give our kids is uncommon, right? I think that's the differentiator. There is a cost associated with a 16-year-old to completely dismantle a laptop. They could cook boards, they could fry things, the whole works can come out as a mess. And sometimes it does. But the power in that is that the student learned, wow, I cooked that board. Now I know how not to do that. Or I learned that's what I shouldn't be doing. Like the power is in the experience.
I think it's a beautiful thing that the students are there behind the help desk because that flattens that, well, it's just an adult telling us what to do.
Since we've gotten the laptops in school, it feels like the teachers and students are a lot more connected.
It was a new experience collaborating with the student on teaching, and not just the teacher teaches the student, but that he felt valuable in the class as well.
There is no distinction. There's no distinction between the teacher and the student. Everyone is on equal footing, and the best ideas win. How can that not make sense for education?
For me to say this is how you do things, that would completely destroy any type of collaboration.
My students, a lot of what they do is collaborative. I don't think that they learn the best from me.
That's where I think it ties into not only the open source and the mentality of sharing and making it better, but then in addition to preparing them for those jobs that we don't know.
So we won't watch the whole thing. It's on YouTube. It's if you just look up Penn Manor High School, you can find it. But the one of the things they don't mention in this video, which I'm a little upset about because it is one of the most cool parts about it, is that the software that they use to roll out, to image the computers and roll it out, the students built it. They built the software to run everything. They took open source components and programmed them together to do what they needed to do. So the kids were in control of that. That's amazing. A high school kid that's doing that, you want to talk about college and career readiness, there it is. Here's a problem, solve it. Especially in the tech industry, that's exactly what it's going to be. So they're cool. This is a conversation that just kind of recently popped up on my radar. In the open source community, there's a character, I call him a character, named Seth Kinlan. He works at Weta. If you don't know what Weta is in New Zealand. They are the people who do special effects for movies. So basically, if you see a big blockbuster movie, there's a good chance it was either ILM or Weta that did it. He's one of the people who works at Weta that works on their back end, and it's all, from my understanding, is mostly Linux based. And he went to film school, and something that we kind of had in common. I went to music school before I became a teacher. And when I went to music school, we learned Pro Tools and Final Cut. Those were the two tools we used. So when I got out, and I couldn't get a job as a musician because music degree, hello, I went into audio video production. But it automatically limited me to shots that use Final Cut and Pro Tools. If I didn't know how to use, Avid or, something else, I was kind of left out. And so Seth wrote an article on opensource.com about the idea of theories versus brands. And he used to teach in the school as well. Instead of teaching Microsoft Word and saying this is every Office suite that will ever exist, just teach them the concepts. Don't teach them a brand. Teach them this is how a word processing system works. And then how can you apply that to different things? Proprietary, open source, doesn't matter. Just give kids more flexibility in the ideas of how they do it. And you'll see, we're going to go through just some real quick scattershot. Here's some free and open alternatives to things. There's a lot more choice out there if you're going that route. Next one's accessibility. This is huge for me because I'm a special ed teacher. Like I said before, people get taken advantage of all the time. There are tons of free and open source text-to-speech engines, some of which work better than yours. But these companies have deals to where they're the people that get recommended through agencies. There's a really cool thing that is going on right now. There's a group called the Accessible Computing Foundation. It's run by a blind man. And they have developed a GNU Linux desktop for any computer that's completely accessible for blind people, people with learning disabilities, people who need, braille readers. All this stuff is built in to where they can install it and not have to worry about anything. It's on the ground floor, but it's coming up, and it's one of the things that I'm going to try to get involved in because I think it's really important for what we're doing. How do you use it? We already talked about Khan Academy. That's a huge one, especially for math people. I'm a math guy. So, although they're branching out now, they're doing a little bit more. Open educational resources. This is a cool place. Everything's aligned to Common Core, so when you look at your program planning for your year, usually you see the Indiana Standard and the Common Core equivalent. You just type that into OER, and it will give you lesson plans for Creative Commons that you can use instantly. There are other sites like that. Engage New York is another one that's huge. They have really good resources, all of which are, I believe, Creative Commons. Open source hardware. This is a big movement right now. You talk about maker culture and hacker culture. This kind of comes from this. This is great for engineering classes, science classes, FACS classes, anything like that. Charlestown High School, we just installed a makerspace there, which is awesome. So kids are creating things and doing stuff. And if they build something, have them license it open source. I always tell kids, if you know how to do something interesting, document it, put it out there. That way other people don't have to go through the same thing you did. They already have it. For my language arts people, Audiobooks, LibriVox, and Project Gutenberg. These are awesome. They're audiobooks. Audiobooks, there's, you just gotta check what you're looking at. Some of the stuff's a little more adult, but it's much more entertaining. LibriVox and Project Gutenberg, a lot of that's public domain stuff, so if you want to talk about your classics, there you go. There's some other stuff on there too. Audiobooks is more recent stuff, but that's that. Okay, so now let's talk about, we've not really talked about software yet, so let's talk about software, because that's kind of where this comes from. It's not about the software, it's about changing how we think about things. So, everybody uses Office, right? That was the big complaint with Chromebooks. All the teachers came to me, why don't I have Word on my Chromebook? And I did this. Really?
Don't be really good, Jessica.
No, I didn't.
Pardon this interruption, but I just wanted to let you know that lunch is being provided. There are 5 serving lines, and as a special treat, Orange Leaf is here. They do accept credit cards.
They keep hammering on that. They take credit cards. It's going to work. I'm going to buy something because of it. So Office, there are lots of alternatives to Office, most of which I think are a little better, to be honest. The big one right now is LibreOffice. Basically anything Office can do, LibreOffice can do. I tell kids who need to open Word documents and they don't have Office at home, I tell them download this, it's free. And it does everything. You can save things in Microsoft formats, they crosstalk, and everything is beautiful. There's also a podcast that I'm on all the time called Hacker Public Radio. There's a huge series about how to use LibreOffice, and it basically takes each program in there and breaks it down on how to use it. Definitely something to check out. This is a big one with my art people, Photoshop, and for some reason the other icons there. This is probably the program I've heard the most of why I can't switch from Windows or Mac is Photoshop. So you'll see here, there's lots of different alternatives, and this isn't all of them. This is just a couple of the big ones. You've got the new image manipulation project, which is the most like Photoshop, Inkscape, which is a vector thing, it's more like Illustrator, and Krita. Krita is fairly new, and I just read an article a couple weeks ago about Krita, that there is an art school, I think in France, that has stopped using Photoshop and is using Krita now because it's better. So they just completely got rid of Photoshop. They were done with it. Here's a big one. Smartboards and Promethean. We all use them. We all love them. There's an alternative for that too. OpenSandCore. You can run that software with any one of these boards and it works. And it's pretty cool. It does pretty much everything the other ones do. And it will crosstalk. You can download like Promethean stuff into OpenSandCore. Google Hangouts and Skype. I refuse to use either one of these. Once again, I don't like cloud things usually. I saw a t-shirt, I don't know who made it. It says, stop calling it a cloud, start calling it other people's computers, because that's what it is. You're putting your stuff on other people's computers. There's lots of things. Jitsi, which is kind of like a Skype replacement. Firefox, hello. If you use Firefox, it's built in, and you can talk to anybody who has a modern web browser, and it's basically Skype where you don't have to install anything. It's awesome. It's built on WebRTC, which is the same thing that Google Hangouts is built on, actually. It's the same architecture.
Are these all things you have to download? They're not just websites, or is it kind of...
Some of it is, some of it's not. It just depends. If you want more about it, I'll let you know. Just let me know what you want to do. Google Drive and Dropbox, everybody uses these. OwnCloud is the same thing. OwnCloud is, I love OwnCloud. OwnCloud does pretty much everything Google Apps for Education does. And you can just run it on your own server. Same thing is more like Dropbox. But OwnCloud, all my contacts, all my calendars, all my files, collaborative document editing. I can install basically like a Gmail kind of email system in it, and it all runs on a computer I own at my house that I just connect to any device I have. It works on Android, works on iOS, works on Linux, Mac, PC, it's awesome. Charlestown used to have MacBooks. And everybody, this is for you. Everybody is like, what's GarageBand on the Chromebooks? Well, not really one yet. But if you have a real computer, I love Chromebooks though. So that's not an insult. I actually do like Chromebooks a lot. There's a lot, and this is like another small scattering. Audacity is the big one. It runs on everything. Ardor, QTractor, Hydrogen. I could have put 20 things there, and they all work a little bit different. So depending on what kind of music production you're doing, or audio, anything, you can find the program that works the best for your workflow. Most of these things are extensible, so you can change it to work the way you want it to work. I use the first two the most. Audacity is what I record my podcast in. Every 2 weeks when I put out a podcast, I do it in Audacity. Pretty much, I think all the podcasts I'm on use Audacity. It's that powerful. iMovie and Windows Movie Maker. This is another one that everybody at my school wants back. This is another thing that has a huge number of things. And there's this rumor going around that Linux cannot edit video for some strange reason. I don't know why. We have 50 video editors. OpenShot's cross-platform. I think they've been working on it. It probably isn't by this point. Kdenlive. Lightworks is actually, that is a professional, movie studios use Lightworks. And it's open source now. And Blender, which is a 3D modeling program, it also edits video. And it will run on anything too. And there's a ton more. There's actually a website called Alternative To. If you just do alternative to this, and it will give you a list of free and open source things. So hopefully that kind of gave I'm right on time, Steve, 3 minutes left. Hopefully that gives you a sense of what's going on. That's my podcast. Check it out if you want. You don't have to. But if you want to, it's cool. And that's the email address for the podcast. That's my handle if anybody, like, I don't actually use my name on the internet. Tosh. Yeah. Great story. It's actually an old D&D character name when I was a wee lad. Alright, sorry. Alright, thanks.
Very, very good. I learned so much. Now I have a million questions.